Before this video starts, I wanted to quickly mention how heartbroken I was when I heard about the death of James Ransone. I I was in complete denial when I first heard about it, and I'm like I was just praying that it was like false information, like one of online hoaxes, but that was not the case. I've been gushing over this dude's performances for years, and rewatching this movie for this video felt very strange. This is my first time seeing him in something since he died. He has brought me a lot of joy, but it's no secret that he had an extremely difficult life, like more so than you're probably imagining. If you're struggling with your mental health, please reach out, and even if you're not, just make sure to check in on those around you. Ransone had an extremely difficult past, but I wanted to briefly talk about something genuinely heroic he did. In 2006, Ransone was in an apartment building when he heard a woman screaming outside and rushed so quickly to grab a weapon and go help that he went outside without a shirt. There was a woman named Molly Watts who was being attacked by a stranger. He was choking her and was planning on doing much worse things, but he was scared off by Ransone, who was just unwilling to let that piece of shit get away, and so he chased after the guy until the police were able to get him. He saved that woman from further harm without a second thought because he knew what it felt like and didn't want it to happen to someone else if he could help it. He seemed like he was a genuinely beautiful person, and it still feels surreal to be talking about him like this. I wasn't quite sure how to fit this into the video, but it also didn't feel right to make this without talking about it, so yeah, there you go. Rest in peace, James Ransone. And again, if you are struggling, please know that there are places to turn. You're never alone, and you are worth it. I really enjoy the character dynamics in the first movie, which is why it's a shame that we're moving on from them. Yeah, he's back! The Black Phone is easily one of my favorite modern horror films. That's not because it broke new ground or was deeply terrifying or had some uniquely artistic approach, but because it was such a focused, tight, effectively creepy horror movie that felt like a wonderful throwback to 70s suspense films. Its emotional beats felt extremely earned, and I found the story to be one that was simple yet extremely effective while maintaining a nice sense of mystery throughout. I can't say I was quite surprised when a sequel was announced, considering how well the first one did, but it was definitely one of those situations where I was just left scratching my head at what the hell they were going to do with this. It really could only go one of two ways. Either they do a prequel, which I definitely wasn't interested in, or they lean into the supernatural elements of the film and turn the grabber into a ghost. Turns out, they did a bit of both. Basically, this is a situation of, alright, no one's making new Nightmare on Elm Street movies, so let's just do that with the Black Phone. Scott Derrickson said when the first film came out that the only way he would return for a sequel, and the only way he's interested in making sequels in general, is if he has an idea that's distinct from the original and can improve on what came before. The Black Phone 2 is quite a different movie from the first one, picking up a few years after Finney Blake escaped from the captivity of the grabber by killing him with the help of the ghosts of his previous victims, as well as his sister Gwen's shining. She has the shine. Gwen begins to have mysterious dreams about her mother that wind up leading her and Finney to Camp Alpine Lake, a spot where she worked when she was younger and where the two will soon learn that the grabber has his own deep connections, bringing them face to face with the demonic hellspawn of the murderer whom they thought was gone for good. Following up what I consider to be one of the strongest horror films of the 2020s, The Black Phone 2 has a lot that's worth praising. The setting, tone, performances leave a seriously strong impression, and there are points where it really doesn't hold back going all in on its dark subject matter, but the film largely feels like an unfocused follow-up to the original, getting bogged down trying to explain things that never needed explaining, creating unnecessary recontextualizations that actively damage what made the first movie so good, and feeling like it lacks any stakes whatsoever as it shows itself completely unwilling to have teeth by giving even the most minor, unlikable characters bizarre plot armor that can make it feel like there's just nothing at stake here. That feels especially strange considering the grabber is now a demon killer and should be a much more dangerous threat this time around, but apparently that's not the case. It's a mixed bag, and we're going to talk about what worked, what didn't, and how I think this could have been one of the rare sequels that matches or even exceeds the original. Let's take a closer look at The Black Phone 2. I think one of the big things that's really hard to look past is how damn good looking and sounding this movie is. The setting of this isolated camp in the Colorado mountains on the side of a massive lake is perfect, and particularly during the nighttime scenes, this is just gorgeous to look at. You'll have moments that are more naturalistically lit where it gets super dark, which I know a lot of people are tired of, but personally, I love when I can watch a movie in a dark room and it actually looks like nighttime. I'm a fan of this underexposed trend. Maybe I'm on an island there, but then there are other moments where they give a bit more character to the lighting when things are heating up, and there's almost this like subtle neon blue glow that I adore. There's a super creepy look to the movie at times, with the shot of the grabber backing away in the darkness after attacking Gwen being lit pretty much perfectly, and resulting in one of the more memorable visuals of the film. It just looks really great. There's some fun dynamic camera work here that gives this very, active sense to the film. Par M. Ekberg, the cinematographer of the film, did a brilliant job and helped to give the movie a very characteristic look that I just really enjoyed. Mark Corvin did not return to compose the score, although this deeply unsettling theme from the first is still used during the opening credits sequence, which once again is super effective. This time around, Atticus Derrickson, Scott Derrickson's son, came on board to compose the score, and I was honestly really impressed with what he brought to the table. The Black Phone 2 almost feels like a spiritual successor to Sinister at times, and you can tell that they're still trying to keep that great soundscape from Oliver alive. They tried this in Sinister 2 as well, but there it kind of felt like a bad attempt at doing the same thing, while Derrickson here managed to create something that does feel like it's trying to capture a similar feeling, but doesn't do so in a way that's lacking, and also brings his own touch to the film that really worked for me. My Gen Z is showing, but I love this sort of like lo-fi inspired score, like, blue hour ambient stuff or whatever you want to call it. There's some really beautiful stuff on this soundtrack, and that's actually where I think Derrickson's best work came from, but he did a really great job of elevating the more disturbing scenes of the film as well. It's always interesting to me how something as subtle as a soft synth pad, can make such a huge impact when it's used properly, and the final scene of the movie is a great example of what I mean by that, but I'm gonna save that for when we actually talk about the end of the film. From a technical standpoint, the movie is great. So the movie opens with Hope Adler, Finney and Gwen's mother, when she was much younger, speaking on the phone with someone who we can't hear, and this phone call comes around a couple of times for some cool time-bending stuff. We didn't know much of anything about Hope in the first film since she became suffocated by the same sorts of visions that Gwen had and decided that she couldn't bear it anymore, and so she decided to leave her family behind and head off to whatever's next. I love dancing around words. Thank you, YouTube. This was one of the things that I thought made the first movie so damn good. It had a fairly simple storyline, but it had these emotional beats that felt like the glue holding it all together, with one of my favorite scenes of that movie being when Terrence talks to Gwen about what happened.
I don't want that future for you, sweetheart.
This backstory not only established some pretty high stakes for Gwen, but it also was like the entire reason that Terrence was saved from being a standard archetypal abusive alcoholic father. The way that he treated his kids in that first movie was horrific, but that backstory illustrated that so much of his anger came from a paralyzing terror at the thought of Gwen going down the same path that her mother did. Obviously, it doesn't even begin to justify it, but there was some level of sympathy that could be developed with the character when we learned that, even if we can't get on board with how he actually chose to deal with it. It made that final scene hit like a goddamn truck, so I did become somewhat worried when the film opened with Hope, because I feel like that backstory is such a delicate thing, and messing with it to any degree would compromise what made its impact on the first movie so powerful. And I was unfortunately very right to be worried. Something that I've always found made this so great before was how it raised the stakes for Gwen, knowing that her mother couldn't handle the visions. That, at least to me, is such an important side to this, and felt like it helped to ground the movie and flesh out a character who we never had the chance to meet. But the Black Phone 2 decides to just do away with it completely, by having the twist that it was actually the grabber who killed Hope because she had visions about the kidnapped boys and was going to stop him. Way to kill off that arc. Apparently this was the idea that Joe Hill brought to Scott Derrickson that piqued his interest in making a sequel. Which is kind of wild, because in my opinion, this just kills what made her role in the narrative of the first movie so effective, and also cheapens the overall story between both movies. Feels like something out of a bad Marvel movie, which, oddly enough, is not only a problem here, but we'll say the dialogue in the climax is... man.
The boys are found. You're powerless.
I'm really not a fan of this decision, and I think that it wasn't only a bad direction to take the story for the sequel, but also one that actively damaged the established lore, and that's kind of the worst sin that a sequel can make. Oddly enough, The Black Phone 2 makes many decisions that I feel like have been very well established to be things that we don't want to see in sequels, particularly ones that have mysterious elements like the first movie did. I'm at least glad that they didn't completely explain everything about the grabber, like why he ended up the way that he did or anything like that, but going back to the first kills, it's sort of just the most basic way to dive into a backstory for a killer, and it feels entirely unnecessary. Also, the only reason that we know it was the first kills was because Gwen arbitrarily just goes, these were his first ones, after learning that he also killed. Like, why? Where are you getting that from? I'm not completely against it, although I do wish we hadn't had this shot showing a young grabber. It just feels wrong to me. Outside of that scene in the van where he's driving and the older fella is sitting in the back talking to Gwen, that was cool. But my big problem with how this backstory is integrated into the movie is that it basically acts as an excuse to play things way too safe for the modern day storyline. It feels like they weren't willing to take bold risks with the fates of literally a single character, and so in order to try and still get in some kills and horror, they dump all of that into the backstory, which is stuff that already happened years before the story we're actually following, so it kind of just feels cheap. I wouldn't mind this nearly as much if we'd had a story that felt like it had some real teeth to it, but that is not the case here. There are a few big problems that I think really holds this movie back from being a great follow-up to the first. Let's establish what those are, and then I'll expand. Don't worry, I will also talk about more that I liked, because there is lots here. I can enjoy this movie, but I've been thinking about this for too long, and I need to get it off my chest. Alright, one, like I briefly mentioned, is focus. The first movie was simple, but extremely well realized, while the sequel often feels like it's trying to juggle way too much at once, and winds up being unable to tend to any one thread enough to make them feel satisfyingly explored. Another is that The Black Phone 2 is completely unwilling to make the grabber feel like an intimidating force. They're entirely relying on the flashbacks to the kids at the camp being murdered by the grabber when he was younger, alongside the threat of something bad happening to these characters, to be enough for the horror to work. But it gets almost ridiculous at a certain point, watching them build up to what should be an impactful death in the story, only to turn around a second later and have everyone be peachy keen. Let's start by talking about the focus. It often feels like we have way too many things that this movie wanted to touch on, and in trying to cram all of it into this runtime, a lot of it winds up feeling really thin. We have Finney falling into a dependency on substances to mask the pain of his trauma and hide from what happened while developing anger issues like his father did. We have Gwen struggling with the mental confusion and inability to feel grounded as a result of her increasingly disturbing and intense visions. We have Terrence working to maintain his sobriety following the prospect of losing his son while he drank himself into a stupor. Then we have the movie also trying to flesh out the backstory of the grabber by returning to the first murders that he committed, while also trying to play with the reveal that Gwen and Finney's mother did not take herself out but was instead killed by the grabber. There's Mondo trying to do right by the parents of the kids who were killed at the camp by trying to find their bodies. It feels like the movie's trying to do too much. It's also got a rather bloated cast of characters, but I'll talk more about that in a second. Now, of course, we want each of these characters to have a level of dimension to them, and these elements of the story are important, like Mondo wanting to do right by the parents by finding the bodies. It's a really great subplot, and I think that a huge part of why it works is because Demian Bashir is fucking perfect in this role, but the problem is that this great character detail is thrown into a plot with a bunch of other rather complex subplots and character arcs, and just gets lost in the mix. In all honesty, I could have done an entire movie just focusing on his search and make him the main character. He's got a history with the grabber. They didn't need to have Finn and Gwenny. They didn't need to have Finney and Gwen return here. There are options for multiple movies. Like, imagine if we'd done the first movie with them, done a second movie with Mondo, and then, like, I don't know, they come together in the third one, and that could be like a cool build-up in a trilogy. That would be nice. That's how much I like this guy, but again, it's a problem of focus. There's a scene in the movie that kind of feels like a microcosm of the issues with how they go about handling this story. At the end of the second act, Terrence shows up to take Finney and Gwen back home, but Gwen is set on staying to fight the grabber after learning about what he did to their mother and wanting to stop him from hurting anyone else. And the amount of narrative whiplash that comes as these three stand in a circle here damn near made me dizzy. Now granted, it's not out of the question that a big explosive conversation amongst troubled family members would cover a lot of topics, but it's not that in and of itself that makes this feel unfocused as all hell. It's how these things are breezed through, seemingly disregarded when the next topic comes up, and then through the nature of how the scene is structured, feel like they get completely left behind. This scene, frustratingly, covers some extremely important stuff. It's the one sequence in the film where Finney breaks down about what happened in the first movie. It's where both Finney and Terrence learn the truth of what happened to Hope, and it's where Gwen makes it damn clear that despite Terrence's progress, she's not forgiven him for what happened before.
You gonna beat me? Take off your belt and whip me into the truck?
Don't.
My frustrations with it come out quickly, where Gwen calls Finney a coward who hides behind substances instead of facing his fears, and then immediately after he finally lets his guard down, she calls him the bravest person she knows.
We're just like fucking Dad. Putting your head in the sand and numbing yourself into oblivion.
I was so fucking scared.
You're the bravest person I know.
Like within one interaction, we're already having some confusing contradictions. This stuff really needs to breathe more. It's almost like we're seeing the beat sheet of these character arcs and their dynamics, but they forgot to put them in the script, and so they just like dumped the bulletin points here. It's really janky. Then they go on rushing to the next thing, with Terrence trying to make a parental stance and say he's not asking them to go, and Gwen pulls out the history between them. Another moment that feels like it just popped up out of nowhere and is being rushed so that it's out of the way before the climax comes. In my opinion, Terrence was easily one of the most interesting characters in the first movie, and without a doubt, the most interesting side character. So I was really hoping to get more out of him in the sequel, but he's completely sidelined until the end. So instead of having his character be explored following his sobriety and his attempts to become a better father, he just acts nicer during his brief screen time, gets one bit dumped here at the end, and that's it. There's a moment that I did enjoy where he sees a beer commercial on TV, and looking at that causes him to call in a favor to get a vehicle with a plow on it so he can go help his kids. I liked that scene a lot because it reminded him of that time and made him want to be more present. It's a nice detail, but he's just done so dirty in this movie. I think a big thing with The Black Phone 2 is that it has all of these interesting ideas. Like, they were spitballing potential directions to take the sequel, but instead of just like choosing a couple of these things and, really fleshing them out and saving the other ideas for potential future entries, they just jammed it all in here. There was a lot that could have been done with Terrence's character, but instead we skipped all of his development and we're left with a rather hollow take on him this time around, which is just a massive shame. The struggle that made him interesting in the first is just gone. I still like him because I really enjoy what Jeremy Davies does with the role, but as a character, he's easily one of the most wasted pieces of potential here. So by the time this scene ends, because we've speed run over things over the course of just a few minutes, it all winds up feeling hollow, and some of the most important character moments of the whole damn film are just like flat. They're just gone. None of this is to mention the new side characters. Ernesto is introduced early on as a love interest for Gwen. He's Robin's brother from the first movie, and what's kind of cool here is that because they're twins, I'm assuming, Miguel Mora actually came back to just play a different character this time around. Robin is one of my favorite parts of the first movie, with the scene of him training Finn for the final fight being something that hit me like a fucking truck. That sense of honor and brotherhood that he brought to the story really worked for me, so seeing his brother here was a cool touch. Moore genuinely impressed me here because of how distinct he managed to make Ernesto feel from Robin. He's more reserved and less of a fighter than Robin was, but what I do appreciate is that they didn't push him too far over to that side. There's a nice middle ground that's accomplished here where you can feel that the father we heard Robin talk about still did rub off on Ernesto, and Robin probably had his brother's back a lot of the time and defended him like he did for Finney. He's a sweet dude, he's got some great moments of humor, and while he's mostly here to expand the cast of characters and doesn't really go through much of an arc, I still enjoyed having him around. Maybe part of that is because of how terrible some of the other side characters are. He is home to a line that bothers me because of how forced it feels to set up a line for Finney.
She accidentally fell asleep.
Accidentally, my ass.
No one would ever say it like that. It's already extremely obvious that Gwen fell asleep on purpose to fight the grabber, so it's just one of those moments that feels like the script is worried we're too dumb to pick up on what's going on. Also, I don't know why Gwen is just able to fall asleep on command like this, but maybe it's just part of her superpowers. They do have one scene where it feels like we're trying to get a bit of development going on with him, where he asks Finney about Robin, but it's kind of just the most cookie-cutter version of this interaction that you could imagine. It's another situation where it feels like a potentially interesting character is left rather flat because of the overstuffing. Speaking of overstuffing, how about we talk about the other new characters here? Those being Mustang, Kenneth, and Barb. She insists that we call her Barbara, but I'd like to disrespect this character as much as I possibly can.
Right, Barb?
Barbara.
Barb.
So Mustang doesn't get much in the way of a story. She's sort of just there and is pretty much inconsequential, but by far the most irritating additions are Barb and Kenneth. These are some of the most nothing characters that I've seen in a very long time. They're here basically to give Gwen someone to throw her signature insults at, and that alone feels forced. Yes, that was a really fun part of her character in the first movie, but it feels like here they saw how much people liked it in the first one and decided to just do the exact same thing but more often. And it's out of place, especially during the climax of the film. Like, why is she throwing out these quippy one-liners? That does not fit here.
I'm fighting back, you grievous, festering ass wound.
I mentioned that the Black Phone 2 is completely unwilling to kill any characters. And even in the case of these completely pointless background additions, particularly a really unlikable one like Barb, the movie still decides to give them fucking plot armor for absolutely no reason. They're in the climax and get really fucked up, Kenneth in particular, but their fates are left ultimately unknown, not because the movie is trying to build up a sense of mystery or anything, but because, according to Derrickson, they cut the scene confirming that they survived because he literally said it didn't matter. Some of these deleted scenes really should have been left in. We get a moment with Mustang that adds a little bit more to her character. We learn more about the kids from Mondo, which is something that I really wanted. And Ernesto has what's probably his best character moment completely cut.
Look, I'm new to all of this shit. You've got to let me have my second to freak the fuck out.
We see a side to him that doesn't show up anywhere else in the film. Like, there's a bit of a stronger side. You can feel Robin coming out a bit more. It's really cool. It would have gone a long way to making him a stronger character. The scene revealing that Kenneth and Barbara lived does reveal how little they cared about developing these characters, since they're just suddenly like, oh, you guys should apply to become counselors. It's like, whatever, man. The director of the movie said that the fate of these characters didn't matter. I agree that it didn't matter, but that's because they don't matter at all. And the fact that they knew how little anyone would care and decided to cut that scene shows that they also knew these two were completely pointless. So then why the fuck did they waste the time even including them? Was it genuinely so that Gwen could insult Barb? Is that why they're here? This is part of why I find this movie so frustrating, because if the problems of many other very important elements feeling lacking weren't there, and it felt like they were hitting the right notes, then the inclusion of some inconsequential characters wouldn't be too much of a problem, even if their random plot armor and overall pointlessness would still be dumb. But when we do have things that really matter in this story being breezed by, while an entire scene is committed to these two, it becomes incredibly annoying. Mondo is easily my favorite new addition to the story, and if they just trimmed out Barb and Kenneth, given a bit more attention to making Mustang an interesting character, and then had a more focused cast, then I think the movie would have been a hell of a lot better. Also, I just got done rewatching Midnight Mass, and I really can't deal with another bitchy character spouting extremely selective bits of scripture to try and justify being the way that they are. On that note, I know that there are some people who felt a bit turned off by the Black Phone 2's approach to handling its religious themes, with some coming away feeling like the movie was some sort of like Christian propaganda. I'll be honest, I never even considered that when I first watched the movie. As it turns out, it wasn't the intention of Derrickson. He clarified this in the commentary track.
And my duty is to be truthful to the characters and not to propagate any particular religious or even philosophical point of view. I have no interest in doing that.
We hear a lot of religious talk in the movie because the characters are religious. That seems to be as far as it goes, and he made it very clear he wasn't trying to push anything. There's a really cool moment during Gwen's phone call with Hope at the end where Gwen asks where Hope is, to which she responds,
"You know where. It's beautiful here."
which feels like the movie is leaving it intentionally vague enough for Hope to be basically reassuring her daughter that whatever comes next is everything that she hopes it would be, without going against the belief system that Gwen takes a lot of comfort in. I just thought it was a nice detail. Even though I didn't take it that way, I can definitely see why someone would feel like the movie is trying to push something like that, but we do have confirmation of what the intentions were. Why don't we change gears a bit and talk about the parts of the story that I really did like? And then we're gonna change gears again. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but the setting and tone here is genuinely great. Even before we get out into the snowy mountains, a lot of what they did with Gwen's dreams worked super well. They shot these dream sequences on 8mm to lean into the distant, fuzzy quality of them, which I think is a fantastic creative decision and one that makes the murders that Gwen has visions of even more gritty and disturbing than they already are. One of my favorite moments comes early on when Gwen is pulled to her front door in one of these dreams and can hear a phone ringing, and it turns out that it's the phone in the grabber's house that she's hearing all the way from here, floating through the quiet, dreamy streets. I love this. There's such a solid atmosphere in that sequence, and another thing to praise about these dreams is that they do something with them that I feel like I've wanted to see so many times from movies with visions like these, and that's when Gwen is pulled out of them, she often has like genuinely upset reactions because she feels like her grip on reality is falling away.
Hey, what's happening to me?
I appreciate that she's not just like, yeah, these are my superpowers. She's not like used to it. She actually reacts appropriately, which, well, it would have made Hope's story even more impactful if they hadn't changed it. At least nice to see, though. On the topic of her dreams, they really do not hold back on how brutal they were willing to make this. The murders that we see on the campers who were at Alpine Lake when the grabber actually worked there are insane. I don't think I can even show most of it because YouTube is particularly aggressive with that kind of thing when it comes to kids. That's weird. There is some truly gnarly shit going on here, and the movie really doesn't take its time to get to these murders, but there is a scene a bit into the movie after they've made it to Alpine Lake where she has a dream while Finney is on the phone with the grabber, and my dude, there is a kill here that I think has gone a little under-discussed for how insane it is. I'm sorry I can't go into detail on it, but it involves a window. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Sure, it's pretty obvious they use CGI, but because we're dealing with footage that's already pretty fuzzy and the scene is meant to feel surreal since it's a dream, it doesn't stick out as anything distracting, especially when the effect is as crazy as it is. I talked earlier about how great the music in these scenes is, and I'm all in on the dark and snowy visuals. This is the kind of setting that I want to see more of. We're still not reaching the heights of the tapes from Sinister, but this really sets you up for a movie that is not afraid to hold back. And then it proceeds to pull every single punch that actually matters. Hold that thought for one moment, I'm being positive. The character dynamics in the movie, while the writing often does them a massive disservice, are helped by the performances, which are very strong. I can't help but enjoy watching these people interact, and the sibling dynamic from the first movie is something that carries on here in a way that I enjoyed.
You're beautiful. What about me? Do you think I'm beautiful?
I find that if I just let go and accept that this movie is kind of dumb, I do have a good time with it. Granted, I only learned that on the viewing where I was accompanied by a couple of beers, but it was still an enjoyable experience for the most part. It's a movie that is at its best if you just accept that there are absolutely no stakes, and you just get immersed in the setting and enjoy some of the performances. There's some solid humor, the gore, when it's there, is crazy, and it's not like it's completely lacking in really strong moments. That final scene is genuinely fantastic and brings out that heart that I found really tied the first movie together. But before you've realized that the movie is going to pull all of its punches, the sequences that seem to be leading up to really ballsy moments are crazy. The scene of Gwen being attacked in the kitchen closes off with this absolutely haunting shot of the grabber that I mentioned earlier. It's super good. Would have been even better if the scene was meaningful. I am clearly not doing a good job of trying to hold off on talking about the lack of stakes, so let's do that, and I'll share some thoughts on how I feel like they could have improved this side of things. These fake-out deaths don't only happen with side characters like Mondo, Kenneth, and Barbara, they happen to Gwen too, twice. We have that scene in the kitchen which gets this huge buildup of Gwen having these extremely disturbing dreams, Finney having a super intense phone call with the grabber where he talks about wanting to take everything that Finney loves and destroy it all for killing him at the end of the last movie, and then Gwen gets attacked while everyone is watching. Now, I somewhat understand why the grabber didn't kill Gwen right here, because he wants Finney to be terrified of what's coming, but it kind of just took the wind out of what felt like a really intense buildup to a shocking death, especially when the scene is directly followed by a very expository conversation about the grabber's connection to Alpine Lake. So on top of feeling like I just had a massive buildup at the halfway point of the movie that didn't lead to anything substantial, I then have to sit through a roundtable discussion where people either explain things we already know to the characters, or are otherwise just dumping a bunch of background info on us that is really superficial and doesn't actually add anything to the substance of the narrative. Once again though, it's saved from being overly irritating because the performances are just so damn good, so it's not the end of the world, it's just kind of dull. The one that really bothers me is towards the end of the film where the grabber wraps a cord around Gwen's neck and spins her around like Cobb is watching to double check that he's actually meeting his kids again. Blood's flying everywhere, it's brutal as all hell, and then like a second later she's perfectly fine, like no worry. This looks like a character dying to me. Now I get if they didn't want to kill off Gwen, but then why in God's name would you do this to her? They had this really cool idea for a kill, but didn't actually want to kill anyone, so they just do it without any consequences, and then it feels wasted as well as frustrating since this is the second time that we've been faked out on Gwen dying. This is the equivalent of someone pulling back from a handshake and slicking their hair back. Twice! 2 times here. It feels like they were making a genuinely ballsy decision to kill off Gwen. And while I'm not sure how that would have played, it would have at least given the movie a sense of danger, especially since that would, leave the others to fight the grabber without their psychic helper. She could have returned in a spiritual form like the grabber did, but I don't like that idea anyway. I am intrigued by the thought of them killing off the main character of this movie, but I get not wanting to go that direction. The problem is that this feeling of zero stakes is present throughout the whole damn movie. Gwen's getting attacked, no, she's fine. Mondo's drowning in the water, no, he's fine. Gwen gets killed, no, she didn't. Kenneth and Barb get killed, no, they didn't. Nothing. For me, the biggest thing that would have given this a stronger sense of palpable tension would be this. Bring back Donna, the girl who Finney found himself confident enough to talk to at the end of the first movie. Even if they didn't go that direction, they could have had someone, it doesn't have to be romantic, who's sort of like a support system for Finney. He's closed off and reserved, and I think that works for his character. But if we'd had someone who he developed a relationship with, who was trying to help him work through what happened, then the movie could have used that character as a deeply tragic death at the halfway point to crank up the tension. Maybe have Donna and Gwen be friends. They're together in the girls' cabin, and then they're attacked with Donna being killed in front of Finney and the others, but Gwen survives just before almost being taken out. That would have established that the threat here is real, because as it is, there's no threat to anything happening to anyone at any point in this movie because nothing ever has any consequences. That could have ripped Finney of the person who was anchoring him and helping him through his budding addictive tendencies. The halfway point of a story should be where shit gets real, and having that be a fake-out death with nothing surrounding it to make the threat feel real makes it completely flat. A single thing like having Donna back in the story could have given them that chance to make the threat palpable, especially if they'd really spent time developing that character and making it feel like a shock when she got killed. It also would have expanded on Finney's arc since he's now lost the main thing that was anchoring him, and so he's more likely to fall deeper into a pit and want to just run going into the third act. This also would have added more to Terrence's story since he's seeing the side of himself that he hates coming out in his son, and there's a lot of potential material there. As much as it pains me to say it, I also think maybe Terrence should have sacrificed himself. I talked already about how I would have liked to see more of his struggle with how he treated his kids, because it kind of feels like the movie just completely has forgiven him outside of the 2 throwaway lines from the kids, but imagine if he'd still been struggling to be a good father with them. Had that be developed throughout the story, and then have his arc end with him sacrificing himself in a moment to save Gwen and Finney. Wouldn't have to be some bleak message about never being able to redeem yourself or get out of things like addiction, but instead one where Terrence would truly show his kids how much he loves them, and with the strongest act of love you can give to a person, sacrificed his life. Something like this would have made his arc more satisfying, but they didn't even need to go that far. He could have been willing to sacrifice himself, but survived, and if they'd cranked up the threat throughout the movie, then it wouldn't feel like just another fake-out death. I also think that Mondo could have had something similar, finding the kids that have been missing for so long and giving the families closure, but not making it out himself. Once again, themes of sacrifice. I'm not saying that the movie had to do all of this. I'm mostly just spitballing some thoughts about how I feel like it could have been handled better. As it stands, this is a sequel that's inspired by 80s slasher movies that doesn't have a single character death in it. And it's a movie that wants us to feel on edge about the fates of these characters without ever giving us a single reason to believe that they're in any actual danger, which feels especially insane considering how much more powerful the grabber is in the sequel. See, that's another thing. Anytime this dude was on screen in the first movie, there was a really strong sense of menace. He felt strong, he was intimidating and capable, and somehow after becoming a demonic hellspawn and being able to be invisible, he still gets his ass kicked by a couple of teenagers with relative ease. It feels very strange to watch this go down the way that it does, especially once we get to the point where they just start spouting out some one-liners that feel like they belong in an episode of Stranger Things more than they do here.
Oh, you're so fucked.
I think what they were going for was a similar feel to what went down as Finney killed the grabber in the first movie, but that was earned. It was built up to throughout the movie by having the lines that these kids say to him be repeated from what they'd said to Finney earlier on, but now with a new context that gave this sense of inevitable victory over him while delivering the catharsis of him being forced to face that his victims were getting back at him.
Finn's arm is mint!
There, it was powerful, and here, it just feels like juvenile and corny, and not in a fun way, at least to me. It seems strange that they tried to set up a super messed up and gritty movie with the ultra brutal deaths in the flashbacks early on, and then by the time you get to the climax, every ounce of that is completely gone. We also never really got to know the kids in this one like we did with the kids in the first movie, so that was another angle that was missing here. I mean, we've got Gwen reciting Bible scripture like she traveled into the future and is trying to inspire Pulp Fiction, and when we start hearing some of the most repeated lines in the history of storytelling, it just feels like there's nothing left by the time you get here.
How the tables have turned.
I will say, while I'm really not a fan of how he's handled in the narrative, the grabber is still a fantastic villain. Ethan Hawke isn't given any material that reaches the heights of some of what we got in the first movie, but there are some great moments with him, and the weight that he's able to give the character through his performance does a lot of heavy lifting.
I want to hurt you.
One of my favorite things here is since he's supernatural now, the mask is able to switch between its expressions on a whim, and it does feel like they paid proper attention to what would work moment to moment in a way that adds a lot to the character. There is this cold darkness about him that is a joy to see, and I do love the moment at the end when they rip his mask off. Super gnarly. I mean, there really isn't much to talk about here. They fight the grabber while he's riding around on skates, and despite him being a demon with invisibility powers, they manage to kill him. I think by this point I was kind of just tapped out because of how annoyed I was by the alterations in the backstory and how little they did to earn any tension, so while I felt a powerful catharsis during the climax of the first movie, I really got none of that here because the sequel is spread so thin that nothing had been developed deep enough to accommodate any hooks. That being said, there are some bits following the climax that are really great. The delivery from Demian Bashir as Mondo calls the kids' parents is amazing, and now I can finally talk about that scene where Gwen gets a call from Hope. This is amazing. I once again think it's damaged by what they changed because I can't stop thinking about how emotionally complex and heavy it would have been for Hope to be speaking to the daughter who carries the same burden that led her to taking her own life when realizing what could have been. As I do the same, but I digress. It's a really beautiful moment that's carried by Madeline McGraw's incredible emotional performance, contrasted to the very light and airy way that her mother speaks to her, which gives this tremendous sense of peace and tranquility as she speaks to her daughter for the last time. Atticus Derrickson's score here has a moment here where I think it shines more than it does anywhere else in the movie, where Gwen asks her mother if she'll always be cursed like this.
It's not a curse, baby. It was never a curse.
Dude, the way that the score pauses and then swells back in with that change to something heavier and slower than what had been building when her mother says that, it's like the music itself is corroborating what her mother's saying to Gwen. There's such a beautiful weight to that moment, and what Derrickson did there makes that line land 300 times harder than it would have without it. Truly genius writing there. It's such a simple thing, but it completely understands how to play with the progression of a scene, and the warmly distorted synth pad that handles this is just, it makes me melt. This scene is so damn good, in fact, that despite being really disappointed by how the movie played out, I was still welling up a bit because they did such a good job. So, The Black Phone 2. I have many issues with this sequel. I'm all for them wanting to do something different. I entirely invite that. It's not the problem here at all. This falls completely on the execution. The thing is, while I do have all of these problems, I still can't get anywhere near saying I hate this movie because the stuff that works still genuinely works really well. I have a great time with certain bits of The Black Phone 2 every time I watch it, but overall, I did find it to be a huge disappointment coming off of how much I loved not only the first movie, but really everything that Derrickson and Cargill have done together in the horror genre in the past. The Black Phone 2 is a watchable movie with some great character highlights, an awesome setting, an atmosphere that hits hard when it's focused on, and a couple of moments that do land. You can watch it as candy horror just fine with, you know, some sweet characters, but overall, it just feels like a series of textbook sequel mistakes and a complete lack in focus that led to a really shallow narrative. I was disappointed by this movie, but I can at least say that it's one I'll revisit occasionally for the things that it does well. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.